Hello marketer, it's Ty here and welcome to another episode of Lean Mean Marketing Teams. I'm thrilled to be bringing you the one and only Nadia Cameron on the show today. Nadia is the founder and managing editor of CMO Australia and associate editor of CIO at IDG Publishing, one of the world's largest publishers. If you're a CMO based in Australia, then Nadia should need no introduction, but to our global audience, Nadia founded the CMO Australia title, found at cmo.com.au. This is the go-to source in Australia for industry-related news on marketing and technology leadership. Nadia also established the CMO 50 in Australia, which recognises the top 50 CMOs in the country and events such as CMO Momentum. But more than just creating a title and some events, she has created and connected a thriving community of CMOs in Australia and helped raise the profile of our industry and the peers within it. Nadia has also learned a ton along the way since founding CMO more than 7 years ago. She's written more than 190 pages of content on the site, judged hundreds of entries in the CMO 50 since it began in 2016, and researched and unpacked the latest trends in marketing, technology and leadership. Through this research, Nadia has a firm finger on the pulse of the changing remit of the modern day CMO and how they're building future fit teams and driving growth for their companies. Nadia also has a unique insight into how to develop and execute a content strategy from ground zero and how CMOs can think more like publishers. There was so much gold covered in this episode that we're actually going to break it into two parts. In part one today, you're going to hear about Nadia's story and how she's built CMO into the powerhouse title that it is today. You'll learn about where the idea originated from and how from that seed of an idea, Nadia created a content strategy and executed it to a T. Lessons in this are useful for any CMO that is trying to build a content strategy involving thought leaders, industry partners, and an omni-channel strategy. Then in part two next week, we're going to dive deep into what Nadia has learned through the research that she's done, including State of the CMO, by judging hundreds of entries in CMO 50, by conducting countless interviews with CMOs. Specifically, we're going to cover how the remit of the modern day CMOs changed in the past few years and what the top 5% of CMOs are doing differently, which functions they have reporting into them, and how they're building the competencies of the team to be future fit. So you're not going to want to miss either episode, so if you haven't already, please make sure you hit subscribe and enjoy the show.
Welcome to Lean Mean Marketing Teams with Ty Hayes, where you'll hear from CMOs, authors and experts at the top of their game to learn how to create a modern, high-performance marketing team. If you enjoy this episode, please remember to hit subscribe so that you can be the first in line to hear each new episode as it drops. Now, let's get into the show.
Okay, so Nadia Cameron, founder and managing editor of CMO Australia and associate editor of CIO at IDG Publishing. Welcome to the Lean Mean Marketing Teams podcast.
Oh, well, hello, and thank you for having me. I'm very delighted that you wanted to interview me today.
No, I'm thrilled to have you on the other side of the mic. You're always interviewing other CMOs and you've done great things for our industry and what you've created with CMO Australia. And I think you'll have some incredible insight to offer today. So I'm really looking forward to hacking a bit about your career and what you've been up to at CMO Australia. To kick things off, can you give us a brief overview of your career today?
Yep, absolutely. So I did media at uni and I started my career working for a B2B magazine publishing business. So my first job was as a journalist on an overseas trading magazine, a Business in Asia magazine, and a magazine for the telecommunications industry. So a bit of a funny mix of stuff. So I'd done journalism and media and wanted to get into, obviously, media, but that was where I ended up. So a lot of B2B to start with, and obviously that's given me good grounding for what I do now. And then I joined IDG actually in 2002, initially in the online team. We had a dedicated online team back then because it was quite a new thing. And I was a journalist working across pretty much all of our titles. So everything from Computer World, CIO, Australian Reselling News, PC World. I did a lot of stuff for PC World. Linux World, one of the few women attending Linux World conferences. We even had a Computer World Antarctica website. So I wrote stuff for that as well. So interesting mix of stuff. I then became the news editor of Australian Reseller News, which is our B2B brand for the IT channel community. So I was the news editor there, running a weekly magazine, and then moved my way up to editor on the channel publication. I was there for a long time and did a lot there. We did a lot of community building, awards, roundtables, all sorts of things. So well and truly beyond the day-to-day production of a magazine, but certainly that was a big job. and obviously across the websites as well. And then I actually went over to London and worked as a managing editor across a number of B2B titles for the events industry. So in the UK, exhibitions and events are an incredibly entrepreneurial market. So again, I stepped in there as managing editor for our UK title, our global title, and another product which was all about marketing in events, a product that we actually relaunched. So while I was there, relaunched all of that and won a couple of awards for it, which was fantastic. But importantly, you could swap the badges from ARN to exhibition news, and they looked pretty much the same. They were B2B brands, and it was very much focused on helping that community be more successful. So quite constructive media. So I was doing all of that, came back in the beginning of 2013 and rejoined IDG. And at that point in time, I was asked by the CEO to come back, one, to help with CIO. So I took over magazine responsibility there and also across our roundtables and events, but also to launch a new product. So the CEO had seen an opportunity for the new product, which was to turn into CMO, and asked me would I take on the job of creating that. So I did, and obviously 8 years down the track, here we are.
Yeah, fantastic. And I'm sure we'll go into more about that CMO Australia title and everything that falls under it and what you've developed there, which is really special. But yeah, with that fascinating background of tech and marketing and CEO and CMO, I think we're going to have a great chat today. A few points we might want to touch on is what CMOs can learn from a leading publisher about how to develop and execute a content strategy, given your deep expertise in that. And then given the lens you've got and the vantage point you've got, really go into the changing remit of CMOs and how that's changed since 7 years ago when CMO Australia launched. And then the capabilities that CMOs are building in their teams to be more future fit. How does that sound?
Yep, sounds good to me.
Brilliant. Okay, so in terms of what CMOs can learn from a publisher like IDG on how to develop and execute a content strategy, stepping back to 2013, so your CEO has said, I've seen this opportunity for CMO as a title. What did you do next? Where did his insight come from for that gap in the market? And then how did you set about the editorial vision for this?
Yeah, absolutely. So just in terms of IDG, there will be people who may have heard of IDG and
yeah, sure.
Please, haven't. And it helps to understand where CMO came from that point of view. So IDG itself is the world's biggest tech media publisher. So we actually operate in 147 countries. We have over 200 million unique visitors to all our different sites across the world every month. And we own titles that go right across that technology buyer, influencer, service provider, enthusiast. So everything from CIO, the Chief Information Officers and Chief Security Officers, with a CSO product, through to ARN, which I mentioned, through to PC World, which is your enthusiast end of town, Tech World, Network World, Info World. You can see the brand strategy as well, can't you, build? And the business has been around over 50 years. So it's a huge business. But if you're outside of the IT industry, you may not necessarily know it. So, and within that, obviously over the last 10 years, or even more, 15 years, the business has transitioned from just having magazines to websites, to events, to a whole bunch of services that we provide clients, everything from lead generation to custom content services, etc. So it really has changed as a portfolio of products and services. And I think we ran 100 events last year in Australia and New Zealand alone, virtually, which is a lot. We were doing the business about 8 years ago. The business was still very decentralised, and each country had the opportunity to launch products they thought were relevant to their market. So you had a lot of brands that existed everywhere, and then you had brands that were specific to market. So CMO is actually one of these specific to markets. When I came back, the managing director, Davey Adams, had said to me, I recognise that there is this new kind of technology buyer and influencer category in the marketing function. There seems to be a lot of technology coming into that space. And being IDG and having dedicated titles to cover different sorts of IT buyers and influencers, etc., he saw that there might be an opportunity to have a dedicated title for that part of the market. Mine a business quite different. Obviously saw that opportunity. And with the CIO brand, we'd also had that publication that not only dealt with the technology intersection that was happening, like all the new tech there, but also the role of the CIO as increasing their business leader. So he said to me, I want to launch something for this part of the market. I've bought CMO World as a URL. I can see there's an opportunity in this part of the market. Yeah. I think we should have something along the lines of CIO Go
Yeah.
figure it out.
Yeah.
I think he handed me a Harvard Business Review article as well.
Yeah, right. So broad
That-
scope. Yeah.
Broad scope, and said, go figure it out. And just have a look across our sites, print out some stuff, circle the bits you want, and we'll cobble together a website for you. And I want it live in about 10 weeks. So that's where we started. So as I said, we already had that idea and insight into the fact that there was clearly a need for technology information for that part of the market. And then really what I did with CMO is said, okay, well, we're going to look at it from two pillars. One is that marketing technology intersection. So very much core to IDG, how do we help people better understand and utilize technology to help them in their professional lives? So that was the first part, the marketing technology intersection. And the other was, of course, that positioning of marketing leader as an executive level business leader. So everything that we do and everything that we've done from a content perspective, from events perspective, audience building, brand development, ladders back up into those two pillars, and that marketing tech and then the leadership. And that's what we've stuck to ever since we started. There's a few things I also recognized pretty early on. Now, I don't, as I said, I come from IT and business background rather than marketing. So I didn't actually come in with any assumptions as to how you report on the marketing community. And I think that's really helped us a lot. Also, I worked for a company that didn't have any formal knowledge of that either. I realized actually a couple of things very quickly. One was that competing titles didn't treat marketers like they were business leaders. There was a lack of thoughtful sort of analysis and information around marketing technology or martech, as well as marketing leadership. So I could see there was a gap there in those two pillars. B2B marketers didn't seem to exist. And the wider proposition of marketers is that sort of custodian of customer end to end. I mean, that was my assumption coming in. I realized very quickly that wasn't the case. And then a lot of the times they were stuck in marcoms or acquisition. So those things came through very quickly. And I think because we were able to recognize those and we saw the opportunity to fill those as gaps, we were able to build a content proposition that made a lot of sense while sticking very true to this is the audience, the group that we want to help, and not turning away from that and sticking to our guns on that. So that's sort of where the content strategy came from. So if you think about it from a marketing point of view, it's defined audience, and then making sure your products and services align very much with the needs of that defined audience.
And insightful to see that gap. I guess that would have been just at the start of the martech kind of explosion. There would have only been a few hundred products probably back then rather than the 8,000 now. So
700 on the Moomscape. And yes, I had that very early on to look at, to work out what some of the categories of technology were that we should look at. But it was also really interesting because I didn't find competitors were looking at any of that at all. So these days, technology is much more a part of what everybody sees as the day-to-day job of marketing, but there's certainly a gap there. And it took a while to figure out how to actually produce the content for that audience, because IT, you assume a certain level of IT knowledge. And this was quite different because I realized we actually needed to write about this content in a different way. I think it's come a long way since then, and I feel like we can do an explainer on customer data platforms and people are keen on that. But back then it felt more like you needed to really put that in a business context to make sense of it. So
yeah, it's interesting. So like you had to discover what those gaps are, or you saw what they were, but then the content was almost so new. You had to then almost build a market for it and educate the market on the content as you were going.
In fact, one of my freelancers had said that. So I really want to feature on this. I can see this is coming through. Fantastic. And I know he started talking to people and he said, I think I'm actually getting them to think about it and thought about this as something that an editor was going to ask them for some comment on. So it did feel like we certainly along the way we've had those situations where we've written something and gone, you know, you're speaking to PRs and CMOs and whatnot.
Yeah. And has the content strategy changed much over those 7 years?
In some respects, yes, because what fits under the pillars has changed a lot. So just think about data-driven marketing, for example. Certainly a lot, the content's changed because we cover that. I also realised we were doing a lot around that sort of internal side of marketing, but we hadn't traditionally done a lot around the media strategy and some of that side, the advertising side of things. So we have brought a bit more of that into the mix as the years have gone on. As I mentioned, the way we look at technology and write about technology has certainly changed a lot as well, because we can see there's growing maturity around that. So the topics change. But I think, again, you can look at anything that is on the site and you can see it laddering back up into one of those two pillars. So certainly stuck with that. And again, the mix of content that we produce, we've never been news driven, certainly have never wanted to write in market. But yes, so we have made a conscious effort to produce more like long form or thoughtful content from that point of view. But obviously there are some things that need to be reported on because they're significant.
And obviously marketing, there's fads and shiny object syndrome and things that come and go. How do you distinguish between something that might be a bit longer lasting versus something that's going to be a flash in the pan?
And also we get a lot of things in marketing speak. And of course, when you're an IT journalist and you get things in marketing speak, you go, oh, that's marketing speak.
Yeah.
And you're trying to wade through it to what the technology actually does. So clearly we still have to do that when it comes to the technology. But I think there is interest in those things, and we actually look at them and go, okay, well, we'll write something, and then we'll ask, is this a shiny new toy, or is this just a new way of labeling something we always do? And certainly there's a lot of trends that have come back in that I always think of content marketing as a classic example, and advertorials and things like that. Obviously it's come back in a different way, but the premise is still the same.
Yeah. A lot of current debate on socials at the moment around the 4 Ps and whether they're attempts at recreating them. And
I've had 4 Ps, 7 Ps, 4 Cs, 6 Cs. So we'll throw them in. Yeah, we certainly recognise those things, but I think one of the things we have done is done quite a few pieces that we've sort of loosely dubbed explainers, because there's stuff like that comes up. We know we need to just have a bit of a look and go, well, what is this? Is it something that we already know? Is it something new, guys? Is this something long-lasting, or is this something impactful from a marketing leadership point of view? So.
And how important has industry research been as part of this? I know you've put out State of the CMO and other research. How important is that as part of your content strategy?
Oh, look, it's certainly important. We did State of the CMO deliberately to actually gauge some of that ourselves. And when we kicked that off as an annual research program, if you have a look at the questions there, we're asking that mix of standing as a business leader, but also the technology purchasing, influencing the trends there. And then over the last couple of years, we've added in a few more questions around the customer ownership piece. That is important. That's been very useful to help gauge where people are at and how they're feeling, sentiments. There is a lot of different research out there. I tell you what, though, if one more person quotes that old stat around that came out from Gartner back in 2013 about CMOs spending more money than CIOs on technology, sometimes that research can get a little bit overused.
And then what about some of the awards and events you've created? How do they fit into your content strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as I said, so IDG is diversified into events, and I think it's about half our business in ANZ, half our revenue comes from events. So obviously it's a key part of our business, but it's also an extension of what these brands are trying to do, because if you think about them, I mean, yes, we've got a media title, CMO. It's a connector. It's a community builder. And when you think about how we're trying to deliver content and support people, well, that doesn't have to be words on a page. That can actually be through an event format. So we have some sort of core pillar events that we've created over the years, and they've been driven, again, by those 2 marketing tech intersection leadership questions, biggest of which is the CMO 50 program. And that when we created that in 2015, the idea there was that we wanted something that really cemented us within the CMO community. You know, obviously this is a CMO brand. I'm not trying to run a big marketing awards night. I'm trying to recognise excellence as a modern marketing leader. So we felt like we needed something a vehicle that would give us an ability to, 1, cement our position with the CMO and that community, but 2, recognise what this modern marketing meant. So we launched that as an annual program for that reason, and clearly it's become an incredibly taken off. Yes, as a result of that, we now have a CIO 50 on the CIO product side. We've always had a product along those lines in New Zealand, but that's been reshaped to suit more along the lines of what we've created with CMO 50. IDG's expanded that into ASEAN as well under the CIO banner. So it's certainly something that's resonating across the sort of leadership titles. So that was a very important step for us, and certainly has given us both the vehicle to recognise the excellence, but secondly to create that community and foster that community, which is fantastic. So that's a big one. The other one has been the CMO Momentum, the Marketing Leadership Conference that we launched back in 2017. So again, when we were looking at that, you can say, okay, as a media brand, we've got all these summits with CIO summits, etc. CMO needs one too. You need to come up with something. And I always resisted it because I said, I don't want to just create a conference for the sake of creating one. But when I sat down and thought about, well, what are some of the other ways that we can help the community, CMO Momentum sort of started cementing itself again as an idea, as a way of tackling some of that marketing leadership, but also enabling this particular community to come to an event that's specifically for them. So unlike a lot of the other products, and there are a lot of events in market, I know it's a complex, confusing, convoluted market. It is crowded, but the CMO Momentum proposition, again, is very much linked to modern marketing leadership. And we use pretty much the same pillars that we use for CMO 50 to craft the content and the approach for the CMO Momentum event as well. So and that seemed to hit the market, seemed to be a way of differentiating what we were offering, and again, give people an opportunity to come together. And as part of that program, we normally have sort of that networking element to it. Again, because I know that's what people who are in manager and above positions are really looking for. Obviously, continued to build on that. A little bit hindered by something called COVID.
Yeah.
But we did obviously pivot that into a virtual event last year. Unfortunately, couldn't run a physical event.
Yeah.
And we had expanded Momentum into Melbourne in 2019 as a second leg. So this year, Momentum will return as a hybrid event, and we will run it in Sydney. And then hopefully from next year, I can bring it back to Melbourne as well as a live event. So yeah, they've been sort of core events, editorial-led events. But also what I would say is that clearly every year we build on that. And my role as publisher is obviously to keep building this brand and building the proposition and building the mechanisms that we have to be able to connect this community. So there's always too many ideas and not enough capability to actually do them.
Yeah. Did you ever, when you dreamt up the CMO 50, did you ever imagine it would become as well regarded and successful as it is today? And for those that have never heard of it, we've got a global audience that basically identifies the top 50 chief marketing officers in Australia, the most innovative marketing leaders. And it is a fantastic event. I'm lucky enough to be featured in there a couple of times and been to the events, which have been amazing. And yeah, it is so nice, I guess, for these leaders to be recognised and to build that community with other marketing leaders all going through similar challenges. So I know as a participant and attendee, it's something really special you've created. Yeah. What's it feel like from your side? Did you envisage it becoming?
I didn't realise it would become as I knew that it would be something that would resonate, but I guess I just didn't realise the extent to which it's valued. And certainly every year it's just fantastic to see people supporting the program and then getting so much out of it. Feedback we get when we run the dinner. So obviously we've got the whole lead up with the nomination process and the judging and all the things to do that, which is getting harder and harder. Yeah, I think last year's meeting was the hardest thing I've ever done in terms of judging. But yes, when we have that dinner and that event, clearly we are announcing a list, and there's a lot of focus on that. There's a lot of excitement and buzz around that, and clearly a lot of recognition that means something to be in the list. But also just the connection and the way those people come in the room and they're talking to each other and engaging, and then then they're spinning ideas off each other and having a chat on LinkedIn, and all of a sudden someone's saying, yeah, I caught up with so-and-so because I met them at the CMO 50. And I mean, that's fantastic, because that just says to me that we're doing something that goes to what this brand's all about. We're fulfilling on it, which is fantastic. So one of the priorities we have is how do we continue to build on that to make it even more impactful, not just at one point in time in the year, but obviously across a whole year.
Good content strategy, require thought leadership and relationships with other influencers. And it sounds like you're doing so many things right, because you're building trust with the audience by building a community and giving them value first, both in terms of content, written form, and all of these events, and then these awards which give them recognition. Yeah, has that been critical to then get the engagement from the CMOs when you need to do interviews or develop content?
One of the first things I did was I literally just started trying to book meetings with CMOs, obviously, and start doing profile interviews of CMOs.
Yep.
I think there were a couple of early ones. I think one of my earliest interviews actually was David Redhill. And lovely, I'll chat with him. That was very core to building credibility and trust. And, it takes quite a lot of time to do that, especially when you're not known in that community itself. And I think the additional challenge I had was that IDG, unless you're a B2B marketer in IT, you probably didn't know who IDG was either. So there was a lot of credibility to IDG as a business. Clearly it took some time because I needed to educate people not just what CMO was all about, but what IDG was all about too. So it does definitely take some time. And clearly that's crucial to any brand that considers itself serving a particular audience. Credibility in that group, and clearly the CMO group. I think what's interesting as well is that marketing knows it's its own profession. Like there's a bunch of people who work in marketing and they'll go to there's other marketers here. But I'm not sure the CMOs felt that kind of link to other CMOs. And that's certainly, I've seen a lot more of that in recent years, and I know that CMO 50's played a part in that, which is fantastic. But yeah, that was something I think also recognising that this is a group of people that need to know they are their own community. That's also helped build it up. And clearly, as you do that, you build the credibility. So, and obviously our focus has always been the client side marketer, not the agency side. I guess it's taken me a lot longer to build the agency relationships.
But I guess that tight positioning has differentiated your brand, right?
Yeah.
With the audience you're trying to serve.
Exactly.
Now, how important do you think content marketing is for brands, and do you think most CMOs should think like publishers?
It's an interesting one. Certainly last year we saw an awful lot of that happening with the pivot as a result of COVID. I mean, everyone became a content publisher more so than ever before. I certainly think there's an awful lot of similarity between what I do as a publisher in terms of brand building and what CMOs do in terms of brand building, and content plays a role in that. I'm not sure I'd suggest that they literally call themselves publishers, but I do think at times that there is a lot of focus on content, but a lot of the focus on content is self-serving. And I think one of the things that a publisher does is recognise that clearly you have an audience that you're writing for, and it's not about you, it's about them. Obviously, the unique part of being a media business is that I have another set of customers, which of course is all the advertisers and sponsors that work with us. So alongside the role I have looking after the audience and fostering the audience, I also have a role to play with our accounts team, our sales teams, on how we make sure we provide the best experience and products for that part of our customer base as well. So I suppose my point of view is a little different on that. But if I bring it back to that sort of idea that whatever you do with content needs to serve that audience, and it's not actually about you, then I think that probably is a good piece of advice.
I think it was Jay Baer's book, Utility or something, and all about just being useful to your audience and providing that value, which CMO absolutely does. The point around the strategic partners, I imagine your business wouldn't be where it is without the support of them. And I know you've got some big kind of tier one sponsors for some of your programs. So,
and like for example, Adobe has supported the CMO 50 program for years now, and been our sole sponsor. And that's enabled us to grow that into what it is. So I'm very thankful that we've got a long-sighted sponsor like that to help us with some of those strategic programs too. But yes, we've had a lot of different supporters. As you can probably imagine, commercially, a lot of that was technology providers in the beginning, but certainly the mix of customers is changing there on that side of the fence. But yes, I mean, that is our revenue model. That is our model. So without that, CMO wouldn't be here.
Excellent. Well, last question on this. How different does it feel when you've kind of founded and started a media publication like CMO and created all of these events versus working on a title that was already there?
It makes a huge difference. I mean, obviously it's my baby.
Yeah.
And I know I still get asked questions from people saying, oh, when did you join CMO? And I'm like, I made it up. And so as a result of that, clearly my buy-in commitment to it and passion for it is infinitely higher than it would be, I guess, if I was just hired help on a particular product. But having said that, when you're the editor, you do craft products in your time. And obviously there's different points in time where editors know it's time to leave. You've done what you can and it's time for somebody else to take charge. It probably sounds strikingly familiar to marketing leadership. Yeah, I mean, being able to build CMO and control the content, control the brand, diversify it in the way we have, feedback everything I learn from people on a day-to-day basis has been fantastic. Supported within that structure, the commercial structure, the support teams at IDG. So,
and I know it's a pretty lean team that makes the magic happen. But you've done a phenomenal job, and hope you're not going anywhere too soon. That brings us to the end of part 1 with Nadia Cameron. But be sure to tune back in next week for part 2, where Nadia outlines the skill set, competencies and criteria you need to become a modern day CMO and which capabilities you need to start building in your teams.
Thanks so much for listening to Lean Mean Marketing Teams with Ty Hayes. This podcast is brought to you by Growth Generators, a consulting firm that helps CMOs design and build modern marketing teams that drive growth. If you need help optimizing your marketing team, head to growthgenerators.io.